Hello. Happy New Year. Welcome to Let's Talk Maywood Special Edition. I am your host, Dr. Reggie Ratliff, and I'm happy to be here on this New Year's Day. But I'm not alone. I come bearing gifts in the form of knowledge from my co-host, my buddy, my co-laborer in the vineyard, and investment advisor, expert investment advisor, Terrence Hollingsworth. Terry, are you there?
Yes, sir. How are you, Dr. Ratliff?
Good, my brother. Happy New Year.
Yes, sir. It's the first day of the year, and it is Sunday, and
Yeah.
everybody's at church. But
Mhm.
I am on my this is my second meeting for today because
Mhm.
you got to start the year off right. So why
Right.
are we here, Dr. Ratliff? Let everybody know why on New Year's Day when everybody's relaxing and coming home from church or going to going out to eat and spending time with the family. We're
Yeah.
here and we're engaging.
Well, I think that as you mentioned, I too was involved with church. Even did my weekly run, and but what's important is being able to reflect, Terry, and show that January 1st is the first day of the new year, but we coming into it the right way. We talk about things, projections. Now we spend a moment that we're going to do in this podcast to reflect on 2022, but the goal is to set standards, high standards, and to achieve standards regardless of the barriers in the new year. So this first day of the year, no better way to get started than talking about what it is going on in our world from a business standpoint.
I said in the meeting that I was in prior to coming on to this one that all the high achievers that I know are, they're not working long today, but they're having these meetings. So, both of us have a wrestling background, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of coaches and a lot of teams are practicing today.
Yep.
It's just it's a way of life. It's a lifestyle,
Yeah.
and I am glad to be here and doing this. To be honest.
I can reflect on going to Proviso East, and every year we would have winter break practices. You still had the Christmas tournament, you had the Midlands, where we would go watch the Midlands, but we still had a wrestling tournament the first Saturday of January. So we had to stay in shape, whether it's
Yeah.
to cut or maintain weight or whatever. But I remember, going through, Christmas, I'm sorry, Christmas Day and New Year's Day workouts, and while everybody was chilling, coming home from church or whatever day it fall. We were in that wrestling room, lower level with the freshmen, upper level upstairs with JV varsity. Shout out to the coaches, Lid, Cartwright, Cuss, and Flowers. Those were the best times, though, Terry, because they laid the seed, the foundation to today and what we're doing in terms of giving back, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, we practiced. Our team was ranked I think number one in the country, and we practice Christmas Day, we practice New Year's Day.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't want to lose ground to anybody, and
Never.
so
Mm-mm.
um, that's just what it is. It's about the grit, and
Yeah.
you know, I get in my feelings sometimes because we get caught in this thing about education, and education is important, and
Yeah.
um, you know do you go how far do you go? Do you get a master's degree? Do you get a PhD or whatever? But education means nothing if you don't have the grit to go and continue. And as a billionaire has said, they're looking for guys that that would go out on a Saturday night and then show up on a meeting Monday morning. I mean, not Monday, but Saturday morning at 7 and 8 o'clock with their clothes on that they went out in. Right?
Right. Right.
That hey, I'm not taking the time off. I understand it. He talked about when he was in college that he would be at the party and leaving at 2 o'clock, leaving the party at 3 o'clock. He was studying, right?
Yep.
And that's what it takes.
As an educator, I look at students, K through 12, as a professor, adjunct professor, and so I tell them, just like I tell my children, it doesn't matter how well you do in school. Anyone is capable of receiving a good grade. Okay. But the difference is how you stand out is what are you doing with the information that you're obtaining, the information that you are retaining, not to commit to memory, but retaining to give back to the greater good. What you and I are doing is giving back to the greater good, sharing our knowledge, insight, foresight, and being able to share that with our community. The wisest man I've ever known, Terry, was my late grandfather, Stuart Ratliff. God rest his soul. He did not have a master's. He didn't have a doctorate degree. He took care of his family. He was there to support me and my siblings as grandfather and grandparents. But what he said to me was profound when I was in freshman in high school making an honor roll. He said, if you get A's, regardless of what level you're at as far as academia, and you doing well in life, none of that matters unless what? Unless you're giving back. If you aren't giving back, then you've learned nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where our world is today. We're so selfish to keep everything to the chest, and we don't share how to be strong, how to be critical thinkers, how to get over barriers, how do we make it through? And so
So
that's what we need.
let me ask you a question. You're dealing with students. Um, do these kids have the grit, or is it on the teachers and the coaches to teach grit?
It's a great question. It starts at home. You have to have it. It's an innate ability to show that grit. So it's established at home. It's in them. It's in the DNA. Okay. If you have it, it has to be developed. That seed needs to be planted, which it is at birth. But it also has to be. It has to grow, and it grows from within. And from there, it expands into the schools. It expands to the churches. It expands to the community center, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, YWCA. It goes to the coaches because they hone in on that skill. If you're a talented basketball player or football player or wrestler, that is then the coach's responsibility to hone in on that skill to help develop it so you can perform on the field, on the mat, on the basketball court or what have you. But the short answer, Terry, is that it starts at home because it's in them. And so what I found in my teachings, even back in Maywood in Chicago, CPS, working in charter schools and things like that, is that the students have that drive, but they don't have the guidance. There's a lack of guidance, which means their focus is on the left when it should be centered. So it starts at home, but it takes a community. There's that African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So let me ask you another question then. So
yeah.
um I don't know for certain, but it seems like there is an increased number of suicides
Mm-hmm.
at the level of high school students or teenagers and things like that. What do you attribute that to? Because, you know, I've been in this place where I'm saying it is tough,
Yeah.
but the truth is it tougher today than it was in the 80s and in the 90s? Because I remember, and I'll be quiet, but I remember when I first moved to Chicago and there was this gang violence stuff and people were getting
Mm-hmm.
shot over shoes. We don't have that today, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a risk of being a drive-by going by and an innocent person getting shot and killed.
Yeah.
What do you attribute the what I think is a higher number of suicides today than in the, let's say, the 80s and 90s?
I don't have the right answer. I'm not a clinical psychologist. These are different times now than it was when we were growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, things like that. We didn't have the, technology that we have today. We didn't have accessibility to to things that will endanger our mindset, if you will. Many analysts and psychologists and things of that nature say that it is mental illness. There's a form of mental illness and things like that, which I don't contest or debate against or anything like that. But the one piece that's missing, that's not discussed, Terry, is the spiritual aspect. You know,
Aha. Yeah.
we don't discuss what's going on with us spiritually. And unless your spirit is right, nothing else is going to fall into place. And some of our guests, like Bishop Thomas Clark, and some others who've been on our show, on our podcast, can attest that your spirit has to be right. Jesus cast demons out of people who had reprobate minds, you
Correct.
know, who served false gods. I mean, the woman with the spirit of divination, when Paul and Silas cast the demons out of her, they were jailed, and we know the rest of the story. But that spiritual aspect is missing in our community. So no one has the right answer. But I can tell you that we need to get back, the church needs to get back to the community and provide that support as a resource, like they did back in the 70s and 80s when Pastor Sykes was at Second Baptist Church. And, we had other pastors at Broadview Baptist and First Baptist, and, Pastor Bishop Chamberlain at Miracle Revival Center. Just that aspect is missing in our community. And until the church body refocuses on this thing called spiritual warfare, we will continue to have these unfortunate tragedies happening amongst our children.
So I want to ask you a question that is really relevant. I do a lot of community engagement work, and so we're organizing as grassroots levels. We're hosting events. I've said this, and you can be on either side of this, but I believe that the church has lost its leadership role in the community. And it used to be that if you want to find out information or you want to organize people, you did it through the church. Now, churches and pastors are not doing that. What is your thoughts on that?
I think pastors today have a great responsibility to compete against different types of sex. Sex meaning SECTS, not sex SEX. But when you're dealing with those different entities, Terry, it makes it harder to reach out to those who are the least and lost amongst us. As I said before, there's so much information on the internet. There's so much with social media alone. If you have somebody who is an influencer who speaks out against, religion and spirituality, that can influence those who are, kind of hurting spiritually, could send them off in the wrong direction. I do believe that, the pastors and bishops, the spiritual leaders, has to refocus, whether it's at a convention, annual convention, or monthly meeting with other churches in the area, or just within their congregation. I think pastors need to listen to the congregation and hear what they have to say, because I really think there's a disconnect between the pulpit and the pew, from my perspective. I can't speak for the entire nation
No,
or
I,
matter.
I, I totally get that. But what happens outside of once you get from the pulpit to the pew? What about the community aspect of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
about of course, in the '60s, when there was um, political organization going on. It was going through the church. And then all of a sudden, you started seeing the church bombings because they knew that's where it had nothing to do with, religion. It has everything to do with politics. They
Right.
knew that that's where organizing was going on.
Right.
So, what does it take to get the churches to reconnect or reassume or assume that leadership role, or are we just in a different place and churches just are not going to be have that leadership role anymore?
I believe that when you think of a prestigious school such as Howard University, their seminary is powerful. When you think about other seminaries that focus on, that's community focused, community based from a grassroots standpoint, those pastors who go to seminaries. I don't really see that in seminaries that really teach that. I also see an opportunity for even congregations, church leaders, to hold classes and facilitate classes on how to become engaged, to be a witness of Christ. To work, to get out there outside the four walls of the church and minister to people who are, who've never been to church, who hasn't been to church in years, and to reach out to them. It doesn't have to really be formal. They just have to be prepared. And I believe that, today's church leaders, if you will, today's church, which is far different than it was, in its 70s, 80s, and 90s, needs to get back on the saddle at the basic level and get back to the grassroots level so they can reach out beyond the four walls. And I think there's a great opportunity for pastors, preachers, deacons, deaconesses, to do that.
So, in terms of leadership, when we talk about how things have evolved, and now with the internet and all these things, this Let's Talk Maywood, which is also Let's Talk DMV,
Right.
right? It is creating this space where not only can people bypass traditional outlets. So you don't have to go to a normal newspaper,
Right.
Or rely on television, right? We can produce and we can, go direct to consumer,
Yeah.
if we want to say it that way.
Right.
Why did you want to do this broadcast? Why did you want to kind of be on this kind of a platform?
Well, first, my brother, you and I first had that conversation this past summer. It was we had talked about off and on how would we give back, especially to Maywood. You talked about having that podcast, and so I'm gonna give you credit because you brought it as an ideal, and it just kind of resonated. It just kind of went from there. It's like, let's do it. I mean, because
Well, do you remember though? I was against it. You first said, "Hey, let's think about this," and I was like, "We got this
yeah,
this platform," but I was like, "Nah,
yeah.
I'm not really interested, right? I don't want to do it, right?"
I guess
And
I didn't want to
so,
remember that, but yeah, yeah. I guess the Holy Spirit hardened your heart. I don't know, but
well, I can tell you why I do it. Right, I work in finance, and I think this is really important conversation because
mhm,
you and I we have taught finance at Triton, and we've expanded it to certain families that ask us to come in and teach their family about finance and things. But what I know is that it is very difficult to get through the weeds of finance,
yeah,
right? Um, there's no incentive, and people should understand this. There's no incentive for um, people that work in finance where they make really their income from commission to
mhm,
come in and talk to just the general public or people that don't have a lot of money about finance,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so therefore, continually we're behind because we can't get anybody to come.
right,
Same goes for church. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, Church of God in Christ,
mhm,
and they told me that for whatever problem I have in life, you're supposed to come to church and get a spiritual answer to that.
yeah,
That has not been the case for me. And
right,
I've gone to a lot of churches. So when you go to church and you try to ask them about finance, the only thing that they can say is, "How will a man rob God?" And have
right,
that whole conversation about
right, right,
about tithing. And we're
yeah,
not talking about whether a person should tithe or not.
right,
That's a personal decision,
mhm,
right? But tithing comes down to be a budget conversation.
yeah,
And generally, when people are going to church, they want to do right, they want to tithe, they want to live right, and all these other things.
right,
But how do you do it in the weeds? What are the small steps that you could take? And the churches again are not, stepping up to the challenge to create that programming. And so, do we go and fight and try and force the church to do it, or do we come on to some of these kind of things and make it available? I will say this. Last thing I'll say is that
mhm,
Um, Dr. Ratliff was very instrumental in helping me understand my need to come and speak to people and teach finance, even though I wasn't going to make any money. I mean, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
someone putting $50 a month inside a mutual fund
Mhm.
um, is nothing for me.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, I think that's great conversation. That's why this podcast, Terry, is so essential in the growth and knowledge of our people. Um, and I will tell you, I will tell the audience, those who are listening now and later, that you did not want to participate in the financial education class at Triton College back in the early 2000s. And so when I brought it to you, it's like, man, kind of brushed it off. I said, look, bro, look. This is something that our audience need. This is something our people need. This is your way of giving back. And what good is it that you are making, you're advising and managing, $1 billion portfolio, but you aren't giving back to this particular community, Proviso Township, Maywood. And
mm-hmm.
think about it, pray on it. You came to me a couple weeks later and say, yeah, let's do it. And it started off with both of us talking. And the audience was mostly white, Triton College in River Grove. There are a couple of them who were snooty and smelling themselves. Yeah, I got a portfolio and all this. And, and you started asking them some tough questions. And those people were like, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about that strategy. And you were very bold. You were kind of blunt. I was like, ooh. But you know what? It kind of changed their mindset. Like these two young African American men, because we get a bad rap, especially when
Yeah.
it comes to like a skilled, field like finance. But they started to respect the conversation more and more. They became more open, and then you started to slowly lead the class more and more often because they adjusted to both of us. But you were really hitting them down like with nitty gritty. I'm like, oh dang, that's good, that's good, and they responded. So through this 2-year program, totality, we were there for a little over 2 years. But by I'll say the fourth week, they were totally engulfed by your knowledge and your personality. Because even when they gave an opinion, you would say, "No, that's not exactly correct." But you say, "Let's
Well,
think about this. Let's think
yeah,
about."
because here's the truth. Today we have so many people giving investment advice. I mean, there you can pull up YouTube and you'll get 1,000 different
Yeah,
ideas, right?
yeah, yeah.
One of them being my first interview. Uh, Black guy. He didn't hire me for the record, but
Surprise.
uh, he said, we do not sell insurance as investments.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very important understanding about wealth creation.
But can you tell
And
us why? Can you tell? Because there's a lot of people out there with insurance licenses who are trying to give it, investment advice. Why is that important to even mention?
well, number one, most likely, if they're trying to sell you a insurance product, they don't have the ability to sell you an investment product. So you can buy life insurance that's a whole life policy that doesn't have any exposure to the stock market, or you can buy a policy that has exposure to the stock market. So they'll invest your money in mutual funds
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like this. Well, if you have a agent that can't sell the other policy, he's only going to talk to you about a whole life or something like
Mm-hmm.
this.
Right,
Not to say that the strategies are wrong. They're just, how does he get paid is what it comes down to.
right.
But at the end of the day, here's the other truth. You're never going to get the return out of an insurance policy because insurance is insurance.
Right,
They're betting that you die. You're betting that you live,
right,
right?
right.
You know what I mean, or
Yeah,
vice versa,
right.
right? You know what I mean. They
Yeah,
pay out if you die. If you live, then
right.
then they win, right? So,
Yeah.
but if you just put that money to work in the same way, then guess what? Your returns are probably going to be better
Mm-hmm.
and you still have the protection. There's a very popular conversation about, you know, make your insurance policy be like a bank. You can be a bank.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? If you have assets and you invest in stock markets, you can put it up as collateral. and
Mm-hmm.
you can still borrow money against it and things
Mm-hmm.
like that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So people think it's some new trick out there. It's no new trick.
Right. Right.
And I'll say this a couple things, right? There was a study that just came out. It said that black people were negatively affected more than any other group by the collapse of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Ratliff. Why do you think that's the case?
Because they believe the hype. That's what I say.
Yeah,
They believe the hype. It's better than investing in stocks and those that's regulated, because that is unregulated. I mean, I don't have a clear answer, but I just say they believe the hype because I see all the comments and stuff. I hear people talk about it, engage in conversation about it, and they swear by it. So I say,
well, how about this? We are, as a community, are so aggressive. We're always looking for the next lick,
believe the
right?
hype. Yeah, yeah.
So guess what? When we start investing in the stock market, we invest in penny stocks, the most high risk investment that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And when it goes to zero and they don't make any money, then they go stock market is it's a sham, or
Right.
all these things. They didn't buy a mutual fund, a conservative mutual fund or anything like this. They bought a
Mm-hmm.
penny stock,
Right.
something that was worth less than a penny. There's a reason why it's worth less than a penny,
Right.
right?
Right.
Same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a pretty aggressive, high risk investment. Doesn't mean that it's not doesn't have value, and in the future it won't be worth more than what you bought it for.
Right.
But in reality, what is it? It is a high risk investment, just like a penny stock is. Um,
Yeah.
you know, what else is out there? Options. You hear
Yeah.
a lot of people talk about,
Mm-hmm.
you can be wrong with an option, right? A
Mm-hmm.
stock option, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you're betting that in 30 days the stock will be, you know, $30 or $35. You have the right to buy it at 25,
Right.
right?
Right.
Well, guess what? If you're wrong on your timing, then you lose 100% of your money.
Right.
Why
Right.
don't you just go and buy the stock outright? And
Right.
if you're wrong on your timing, if it takes 6 months instead of 3 months, then you
Mm-hmm.
still make money, and that's that.
Right. Well, what I like about what you're saying is something that we've talked about in our financial education class online on Thursday evenings. You get into the terminology, like what the capital gains, salary, you get capital gain, capital loss, and talking about, the greatest wealth creation in American history was by the baby boom generation, and how what's happening today with inflation impacting our people specifically. The African American community, even the Latino community, as it relates to investing for the future. But it reminds me of what you asked me a few minutes ago, Terry, about the church. You and I have had great success with facilitating these financial education classes, whether it's at Triton College or Sister Renita, her family home, or at a school or a community center and things like that. But
Yeah,
there's so much more work that needs to be done, that here we are 20 years later, going on 21 years later, and the work remains the same. The
yeah,
demand still remains the same. Trying to show our people, because the Bible says what? Our people perish from lack of knowledge.
yeah,
So we are instilling knowledge in our people. We're not just two, black men off the street. We are fully engaged, fully endowed, and fully accredited to discuss finance and economics. So we hope and pray that the audience will continue to grow as we bring in people in our safe space, so that we can share knowledge about the world of finance. Because guess what? Finance impacts us in everything we do.
yeah.
Everything. If you're broke, still finance. You're just financially insolvent. But if you got money, you got financial rich, or you wealthy. That's the reality. Now sports is the business of sports. COVID, the business of pharmacy.
Hmm.
Entertainment is the business of entertainment. And it's all related to finance. It's
Without doubt.
protected against Ponzi schemes, right? These
Yeah.
people who give bad advice,
I
or
mean,
even
that's that really has been probably as much as the work that I've done, which is, let me not tell you. For example, when I was managing or I'm managing money for people, I'm really focused on the ideas that I am trying to bring people to. So,
Yeah.
um, we were part of bringing Zycam public. So, I'm pitching Zycam. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
here's this thing. If you have a cold, and the normal duration of a cold is 14 days. You take this when the symptoms first hit, your cold is gone in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. So you can go to any store right now and buy Zycam.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're very focused on that for me for work. We raised $25 million for that. But in this class, what do we focus on? We're focusing on teaching the ideas behind
Yeah.
investment principles.
Right.
Why, when markets, for example, high inflation and people start buying gold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in the situation where we're in now, where we're in high inflation and the interest rates are rising,
Mm-hmm.
why, do you invest in technology for long term?
Mm-hmm.
Or what is the short term that you would look to invest in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's not me telling you, hey, this is better than this over here.
Right.
It's you making a decision based off of your decisions
Right.
or your goals
Right.
of I want to own this because it makes sense because this is where I want to go to,
And
right?
it does make sense, and I think we have value added principles when you talk about things like that. You see on the surface level, you have like a junior achievement who does some great work on a basic level with personal finance, putting the budget together, understanding credit, putting together a business plan, and maybe pitching it to employer and things like that. And you have Money Smart Week, which happens once a year, through the city of Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, and that is all well and good. Our teaching method though is related directly to real life application. We teach students, elementary, middle school levels, well, high school, through young adults and seniors who have some questions, and those who are younger, like a younger people audience, they don't know what to ask because they don't know much about finance unless it's taught by somebody in their household. But through our class, when you send an email to us you see the email address there as ratliff68 at yahoo.com. We share a link with you and you come in. But here's the most important part. Our classes are free. Doesn't cost you a dime to learn about the world of finance. And the knowledge that we teach is laying the groundwork for the rest of your life, not
Yep.
just for a grade, but beyond high school, whether you go to a trade school after high school or college, university, what have you, you still have the principles of finance that's going to take you further than any basic program will take you. And so we're proud to say that. And we've been doing this again for 20 years, and we've had a great success from our former students who are now young adults thanking us to this day for our classes.
So let me address something that you just said about what happens at the student level, right? And junior achievement, for example, and most financial literacy programs, what do they teach? They teach personal finance.
Mm-hmm.
The goal, really, to be honest, is to try to teach you how to be a good banking customer,
Right,
right? Have
right,
good credit so you can
right,
go borrow money.
right,
But what most of us are after is financial independence and wealth creation,
right,
right? And that is the biggest difference to what we do, right?
right.
We're teaching, this is sad for me, and it's unfortunate. But going back to what you said, the Bible says that the people suffer from lack of knowledge.
Right.
We have lived through the greatest wealth creation period in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Our generation started in 1965. Most of our parents, the Black community, did not benefit from it, right?
Right.
So when you think about the car companies and
Yeah.
the value of Ford and GM,
Yeah.
even Toyota in the
Mhm.
1960s to current price, how much wealth was created there?
Oh my goodness. Oh my
But
goodness.
our community and most of the other communities that you know, yes, they didn't benefit from the the stock. They
Right.
only benefited for. So we hear Bernie Sanders and we hear others talk about fighting for a fair wage and
Right.
what that looks like,
Right.
a living wage,
Right.
right? But as much as we're gonna fight for a living wage and things like this, we're never gonna outpace inflation from the income standpoint. It's always going to be from the investment side,
Hmm.
and that's where we have suffered,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How many of our families work for? And I'll say this lastly to talk about careers, right?
Right.
Whether or not you go borrow money to go to school and things like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That when we're talking to students, it doesn't matter, um, if you're getting a job offer and one of them is a publicly traded company and the other one isn't, which one is
Hmm.
the better offer,
Hmm.
right? Not answering that question for you today. I'm just, you know,
Something to think
um, yeah. So what is the what happens when when you're working for a company and the they're fighting only for a fair wage,
about. Hmm.
right? But not asking for a stock appreciation.
Right.
So I'm from Iowa, and John Deere is a major employer here.
Hmm. Yeah.
6 years ago, when their contract came up, the value of the stock was $36. They would just renegotiate their contract, and the stock was $380. So in
Wow.
6 years, we're
Wow.
talking 10
10
times the amount of money.
times. Over 10 times. Yeah.
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 What would that look like for all of their employees if each one of them had 1,000 shares of stock
Mm.
that they got to own and only paid capital gains on it, and it
Mm.
wasn't income,
Mm.
right?
Right.
These
Right.
are the principles in which we really get into the weeds on it. It's a life decision. It's a lifestyle decision, right?
When I think about Terry, Maywood, um, and the many opportunities that we've had, um, from the period of the, let's say, the early 80s up until today, when many businesses started to close their doors. Why couldn't we reinvest in Maywood? There
Yeah,
was a lack of knowledge. There was a lack of structure. When the Great White Flight took place and African Americans started moving into the community, in by the thousands from the South Side of Chicago or from the South, we did not embrace ourselves with knowledge to be able to keep businesses going. So the Robinsons gas station that closed, the White Way that closed, the Chats Corner that closed, the Flash Car Wash that closed, the Zares that closed, the Venture that closed, the Dominics that closed, like all these stores that closed, were never replaced. And my question is, well, why didn't it? It was because we did not prepare ourselves financially to
hmm
continue to move the community forward. And so now I see us without a grocery store. I see us now slowly trying to build, but is it enough? It's not enough because we still fighting one piece of project at a time. And with that comes so much divisiveness in the community, especially a small town like Maywood, where the population was leaving till now
yeah,
it's 24,000. But when I lived there, it was like 30,000. But 6,000 is a big difference. We talk about the number of people who own homes and stuff now abandoned and empty lots. That has a huge impact. And we see it all over across the country, Terry, in a wider scale.
yes,
Detroit had the problem. East St. Louis had a problem. Gary, Indiana had that problem. Compton, California, they had that problem. Flint, Michigan had that problem.
yeah,
So it's the same common theme when it comes to lack of knowledge. That's not just hurt on people financially, but it's taking lives away, Terry.
yeah. So I think one thing that's uh, great for Maywood potentially. And before I say this, I'm just going to say Gary, Indiana is a really great example of, is almost up until about a year ago, you could went to Gary, Indiana and seen the Jackson 5 sign
Yeah,
on their theater. The
yeah,
Jackson 5, they didn't invest enough into taking down the Jackson 5 sign that,
mm,
the theater is in disrepair.
right.
Jackson
Yeah,
5s ain't been there since, maybe the 60s or something like this.
yeah,
It's
long,
ridiculous,
long time.
right?
Yeah,
And so, what do you do in a place like Maywood? Maywood is big enough to uh, be reflective of the kind of change that can happen in other parts of the city,
yeah,
right?
absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
Maywood has this awesome situation where, North Maywood is predominantly white, and then you have an influx of Hispanics that are now buying homes and things in Maywood,
Hmm.
and then you have the black population.
Right,
So it's a
right.
great mix
Yeah,
of
yeah.
of community. What
Mhm.
is Maywood going to do? Right, that's the question.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. Wherever that strategic plan is, that 10-year strategic plan, hopefully it'll be released sometime in the future. We had Trustee Miguel Jones on here twice.
Yes.
And so we talked a little bit about that, but there has to be a foundation. There has to be a structure, like a real, authentic strategic plan that encompasses the diverse population that Maywood is, the village now, and how that is going to impact us economically and financially. That's going to sustain itself should another wave of businesses close, whenever it is. But be prepared for that. Have an emergency plan, not just a
Yeah.
strategic plan. Have an emergency plan in the event things like that happen. Heaven forbid another, natural disaster like a pandemic take place that will cripple the economy. So we have to be proactive. And I'll just say this, Terry. You know, Maywood, as much as I love Maywood, because I don't just speak Maywood. I am Maywood. It lives through me. I went back to Maywood. I left my good government job, in the mid 90s. I left EPA,
Yeah.
go back to Maywood to help start Eternal Light Community Center. And I was there for the next 20 years trying to get back, teach financial education. You and I know about um, utilizing the multipurpose building known as the former Boys and Girls Club, all that stuff before
Yep.
I started transitioning back to the DMV. My soul hurts because of what I see in Maywood, because this is not the Maywood that I grew up knowing. And wherever the finger is pointing, it all boils back to finance. It goes
Yes.
back to finance. Finance is what's triggering crime. It's what's triggering homelessness,
Hmm.
abandoned buildings, bad politics. Finance is the baseline. It's the genesis and the revelation of everything that exists in Maywood. All 66 books of the Bible contribute back to Maywood. We have to get back to the nitty gritty. And so that's why I'm glad we do this podcast, Terry, because I know Maywood like the back of my hand. My thesis was on Village of Maywood. My dissertation was in part about the Village of Maywood. So it's not just something I'm saying out of emotion or passion. I put that passion to work. So
Yeah.
I know what I'm talking about when it comes to Maywood. And I'm telling you, we as a people in from the Village of Maywood, we could have our big picnics in the summertime and come together from the class of 1951 to current. But when we disperse and we go back to our respective communities, some remain in Maywood, we have to get back.
Yeah.
And there's so many names
So.
out there who are doing well, Terry, who are doing well in sports and entertainment and stuff, who do not give back. I won't mention
Hmm.
any names, but those of you who are from Maywood, you know who I'm talking about. You got to get back more than just doing a basketball camp for kids or help
Hmm.
build a gym. You got to get back to the economics, because guess what? The other people doing it. The other people are giving back to their community, whether they live in that community or not. That's what we need. So we have the power to vote the right people into office to run the village of Maywood.
So I will ask you this question as we should start to wrap up because it is January 1st, and
I guess.
it's Sunday. I'm gonna go watch some football.
Right, right.
All those things, right? Um, 2023. What is the outlook? What do you think? What is your goals? What do you want to accomplish? In terms of not only Let's Talk Maywood and Let's Talk DMV,
Mhm.
but as far as people and making impact.
We want to identify. through Let's Talk Maywood podcast, Let's Talk DMV podcast, we want to continue identifying those who are contributing to the community, um, who are actually doing things, those who are, those you don't know about. Miss Danielle Humes, you may not have heard Norma Hernandez, Jeremy Horn, Donna Werner, Moses Green, those people who are contributing directly and indirectly to the village of Maywood, as well as here in the DMV. I would like for us to expand on that. Terry, I think that we should also continue to focus on pushing the envelope as it relates to the world of finance. I think that we made some headway in the 6 months that we've been doing this podcast, not worrying about having 10, 20, 500,000 subscribers, although that helps increasing the platform, but having a solid following of those who are committed to the cause. I think about Evan, Evan and his bakery shop. He's faithful. He shows up every week and he watches us every week. And those are the type of people that I like for us to continue to reach out to. And so with that, of course, continue to maintain good health and, make an impact in the community, the churches, and what's happening in schools. District 89, Maywood Melrose Park, as well as District 209, Proviso Township, East, West, and PMSA.
I got you. I
What about you,
I'm
brother?
I'll say it again. Dr. Ratliff, you have taken me in directions that I just had no interest in. I'll be honest with you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
been fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
I have really no, I'm comfortable teaching because of that
Mm-hmm.
experience. I
Yeah.
went to Ohio, came
Yeah.
to Iowa, and we set up some of those things as well that we did at Triton. Um, but we continue to just really hone in on, you know, really dealing with grassroots
Yeah.
people and telling them this is how you go about it because, my own experience it reflects what most people experience. My parents took their cues from church
Yeah.
and they took their cues from school.
Yeah.
And church does not do a good job of teaching financial independence and wealth
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah.
School teaches it, but it doesn't connect the dots like it's supposed to.
Right.
So in your math class, it's not really telling you how that math relates to compounding interest
Right.
and
Right. Rule
all these
72
things.
and all that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, it has no value,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm glad to share that. If
Mm-hmm.
almost anybody that I talk to, or if you ask them about me, they're going to tell you it's going to end up being a conversation about finance. It's
Yeah.
going to be a conversation about this is how you understand your 401k plan.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you start investing and things like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Terry, and I'm glad you mentioned even like your parents. My mom, who came from Aliceville, Alabama, my dad, who came from Mount Olive, Mississippi. My late father, you know, they met at Tuskegee College, which is now Tuskegee University, and so they introduced us to education. But it wasn't just education. The greatest knowledge I had was my mom taking me to PLCCA to work for Bishop Porter and being able to be in the church choir at Second Baptist, so he Fellowship Baptist Church, under Bishop
wait a
Hall.
minute, you know how to sing?
Huh?
You know how to
You
sing?
man,
Or
look, I was an all-state choir, in the concert choir and magical improviser under the late Miss Lynn Dreyfall.
oh, I
Lynn
thought it
Dreyfall.
was one of those things like they want you to sing solo.
No,
A
but
little
I can sing.
quieter, a
No, no.
little
I
quieter.
blend in with the tenors. I blend in with the tenors. I can harmonize, and I can falsetto with the best of them. But I learned that from my brother, Dr. Philander Ratliff. But you know, again, it starts at home, man, and so as schools start to expand their knowledge about curriculum, other than civics or personal finance, we're starting to engage in here in the DMV, engage with schools into making this an elective at the high school level, teaching them about investing, not just personal finance, and even having a conversation with schools in Nashville, Tennessee, about teaching about the world of finance, particularly in Title I schools where they have a need for these type of resources and knowledge base. And that was something that I was very blessed to do in Chicago, particularly with CPS schools, with teaching finance, and with you as well. We
Yeah, I
came out.
remember going out
Yeah,
and teaching
yeah,
some
yeah. Going to the
somewhere.
West Side and South Side, and the biggest experience, Terry, with Chicago. Loved what we did, but when we went to Argyle Garden, Argyle Garden is no joke. Anybody who's familiar with Argyle Garden, but we
Yeah.
went there in the summer program. We taught them about finance, and they listened. They paid attention. They asked questions. They took notes. However, they framed it, whatever, but they grasped that information. And when they presented the information to the audience, it was like an eye opener. We need more of that. We need more of that from our community leaders and our people. So I'm excited about 23. I'm excited about 23, man. And I thank God for brothers like you who give back. Because again, I tell people all the time, you don't have to. You could go about your merry way in your business, and
Well,
this
I have every incentive not to, to
yeah,
tell the truth.
incentive.
Right.
but
You know,
but you
but
build your treasure in heaven, though. I mean, that's what I say. You
well,
ain't no
the
earth.
thing about it is, even when I started off, man, I learned the hard way, right? I didn't know what I was getting into when I knew I wanted to work in finance. I knew I wanted to be a broker, but I
Yeah.
didn't know what that meant,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, listening to one of this interview from billionaire that black billionaire that talking about his how he got to where he is.
Yeah.
A lot of it is access.
Yeah.
The people that he were able to access early in his career that influenced decisions that he made.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that we're doing the same thing, right? That
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, having access to me is important. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds arrogant. I'm not that arrogant, but
It's
um,
confidence. It's confidence. I mean,
well, it's I have a level of experience that most people do not have.
right.
And when we start talking about building wealth and investing
Mm-hmm.
in the stock market, what that feels like, and I have a friend that, um, she knew someone that worked at a bank, and what he told her was you have to save $2,500 in order to start investing, so she can start investing in mutual funds.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
That is not correct. But if you
Right.
want to know, if you want to know what to do, right, come and hang out with us.
Yeah.
On
Absolutely.
Thursdays, and we have all these conversations. But what's good about it is that it's not me preaching or Dr. Ratliff preaching.
Mm-hmm.
It's people that are investing that have questions and they share their experiences and truthfully our shared experiences. I
Right.
invest, and the truth is that I don't quite make the decisions all the time the right way.
Right.
There's 10,000 stocks out there,
Yeah.
and depending on your time horizon
Yeah.
and depending on different factors, you
Mm-hmm.
make decisions that you think that are okay.
You and I have
I,
always bounced off, analysis when it came to investing and stuff. And maybe there was a diamond in the rough we didn't know about that you share with me, or vice versa. It's like, wow, this is an opportunity right here, perhaps.
yeah.
And that's what it was. But the other thing I want to say real quick before we go, Terry, is that we tried reaching out to some of the churches. Hey, let's get going. And so and we always get, okay, I'll call you back. If you're not interested, just say no.
Yeah.
You'll say I'm call you. I promise to call you. Whatever. That's fake. Just say you're not interested. And we keep it moving. We're gonna keep it moving regardless. But your delay to me is denied. So we just keep it moving, and then eventually you hear about us.
So let
Um,
me share a story with you.
yeah.
So I have a friend that's a pastor, and he and I we talk about this stuff a lot, but he has not implemented anything in his church. So one of his church members, we end up having a conversation with his church member. She's hurting,
Mm,
her and her husband. They're trying to figure out this finance stuff, and
right.
they're doing stuff. They're going to be retiring soon and things
Hmm.
like this.
Yeah.
That's not supposed to happen
Right.
when the pastor has
Right.
access to me and we're having these conversations, and she's a faithful church member at his church,
Wow.
and there's a gap in there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what to do for them because again it's tough. It's church, right? Do you in any situation you can only share the information, but you can't make anybody actually you know, do it. So
I want to give a shout out to St. Stephen's Missionary Baptist Church in Maryland, as well as Star Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church. They really embraced us when it came down to sharing about the word of finance. It wasn't just two or three people, church members. I mean, it was the pastor, it was the first lady, and it was about 30, 35 members who participated in these discussions. So, I'm praying since we're talking about for 2023, I like for more of my people in communities like Maywood, Proviso Township, City of Chicago to embrace the word of finance. Because guess what? It's not going anywhere ever. After we're gone, it's still going to exist. But be part of the success instead of being part of, the missing out on the success as it relates to the knowledge. I mean, after all, we do preach from the Bible about finance, and it's more
yeah.
to the Bible than giving 10% or leaving your money with at the altar. Will a man rob God is a question, but there are many other questions that needs to be answered far outside tithes and offers, especially in the Old Testament as well as some in the New Testament. So let's come up to speed, Chicago. We need to, because they're doing it big out here in the DMV when it comes
Well,
to.
I'll say this too. Last thing I'll say about this, I was pretty tough on the churches. I feel like church is my family, even though they don't see me very often. But this stuff, right? That one of the things I always talk about with pastors is why not create this as part of your new members class?
Right.
Work stuff that do you want a member that comes into your service or part of your congregation that is not good with their money?
Mm.
Right, that's they come in struggling anyway.
Right.
But how do you build out all the goals of community outreach and all these other things if they're not paying tithes and they are not giving offerings and can't afford to and things like that? So um hopefully someone will reach out to us and let us come in and work with your finance team, not to look at the books of the church, but to
Right.
help you understand how to create a curriculum in your congregation that will lead to more tithing or more giving and things like that.
Well, I am. This will be my last thing. I'm looking forward in 23 to having more leaders from the church, like even Bishop Sappho, to come into the program, and some others out there. Because we have an open podcast. It's not for any specific group or gender or whatever, religious, any spiritual leaders or anything, but we're all encompassing. We all inclusive. So we welcome that. We want more diversity. Continue to grow with our diversity on this podcast as our podcast continues to grow. And so I'm definitely prayerful and hopeful that will take place in this great year of 23.
Well, with that being said, I am gonna go. The Bears were, I don't know if they're winning or losing at
They
this
were
point.
losing like by like 7,000 points before this podcast. I just
So
hope that Phil stays healthy for the rest of the year so they can like draft some offensive linemen and give that dude a chance to win. Because I look, if the
I
Bears
wish
playing like this, he gonna wind up going somewhere else.
I wish they would have shut him down 6 weeks ago
They
so that they
should,
could get the top pick and maybe.
right?
uh,
Maybe, but we'll see. You know, we'll see. I'm
yeah,
I'm just hoping he ends the year healthy. That's all I want. So
yeah. Well, I'm gonna say this: Happy New Year's, to everybody,
yes, Happy New Year, everyone.
and we look forward to doing some good work this year. So reach out to us. Let's be good at the work.
Thank you all for tuning in. Have a fantastic year, and I pray that everybody is safe in this new year and continue to keep God as the head and continue to tune into our podcast. God bless you all.